2 weeks ago, our New Start chaplain at Weimar took a call to be a pastor of a large church in the Houston, Texas area. He was a very effective chaplain. If you ever have a chance to hear Damon Sneed's Wheel of Faith, which is what he would go through in the New Start program, he was able to touch many lives. And as a result of him and also the different chaplain, Don McIntosh, in the Depression and Anxiety Recovery Program, as well, of course, the whole team effort. Last year, we baptized 99 souls from our health programs. And they, yes, that's right. And one was your conference president's wife's cousin. And she had really had a great experience. And I think was Damon Sneed the chaplain then? Yep. And so he just told me, I talked to him Friday, and they just had a workers' meeting there in Texas. And I have not seen the statistics, but I assume it's true because he told me that the Texas conference in the workers' meetings went into the fact that the blue zone of longevity and health and Adventism only applies to the lay people and not the clergy. The clergy are not living longer, and they are having significant health problems that mirror the world. And of course, there can be a number of reasons for that. And of course, after that was given, he said, and they had introduced him from Weimar, he said afterwards, all of these pastors were circling him. What can we learn? We know we have health problems. And of course, many of them in Texas. I noticed not so much here in Arizona, but many of them in Texas are very obese, and they're sitting a lot, and they're not really practicing the health message and those sorts of things. And it actually pays a toll in regards to their health and longevity. But one of the things that also is happening among clergy throughout, particularly North America and some of the more Western civilizations, is burnout. And we see this quite a bit in our program. We have pastors come through our program from multiple conferences, and they do get revitalized by our program. In fact, their ministries expand because they also see how we're taking people from health to Him, and they realize, you know what, the health message is not only good for me, it would actually greatly expand my ability to reach the community and to be able to take them. That's one of I think, the blessings of Weimar. A lot of these other health centers, they're doing good health and those type of things, but they're not really reaching the soul. And but Weimar believes in the threefold ministry: the health, as well as the healing, education, as well as the proclamation of the gospel. And it's when we do those three things in accordance with the Lord's will that exponential results come forward. But just some statistics on burnout here. Let me just pull this forward. One more. Thank you. If you can see it on the screen, let's see. Maybe with that change, it didn't. There we go. What's the definition? Exhaustion of physical or emotional strength. So it may not just be physical strength, it may be emotional strength, usually as a result of prolonged stress or frustration. And of course, we know that the occupational burnout goes beyond clergy. It is characterized in whatever profession by exhaustion, lack of enthusiasm, lack of motivation, feelings of ineffectiveness. And it also tends to have a dimension of frustration and even cynicism that comes in. And the results are you're not as effective as you would be otherwise. Occupations with the largest risk Notice this: social workers, nurses, teachers, lawyers, engineers, medical practitioners, customs service representatives, police officers. These are all in the human services field, or most of them are. But one of the characteristics is a high-stress work environment and emotional demands of the job. In a study that directly compared depressive symptoms in burned out workers and clinically depressed patients, no diagnostically significant differences were found between the two groups. So we often call it burnout, but in reality the symptoms are identical to major depression. Burned out workers reported as many depressive symptoms as clinically depressed patients. And then there's something called brownout versus burnout. More recently, the term brownout has been used in the business world to describe a less serious version of burnout. It refers to staff who are disengaged and demotivated in their job role. So it might be good to go through some of these symptoms. We haven't done this at all in our series here. But in regards to depression, the diagnostic hallmark criteria, this is a Psychiatric Bible's definition, you have to have 5 of 9 of these. Deep sadness is what we tend to think about with depression, but you actually don't have to have deep sadness to have depression. If you just have feelings of emptiness the majority of the time, that qualifies. And since more males are in the clergy field, males tend to get more of the emptiness and not the sadness. And so they think, hey, I'm not depressed. But either one of those qualify, although males can get the sadness as well. They can get crying spells as well, but not as common as women. Apathy. How do you know whether you have this? This is when you wake up in the morning and you're not excited about the day. You wake up and you get up out of a sense of duty and responsibility, but not interest. And that might happen to any of us once in a great while, but if it happens the majority of the time, that is distinctly abnormal. Agitation. This is when, and this one you might need more help with. The Psychiatric Bible also says if you have what's called psychomotor retardation, that you would also qualify. That's a slowing of the mind or body where you've slowed down and haven't recognized it. But, you know, the question that I ask many people as I'm going through this list, are you more irritable than you used to be? And often the person will say, no. But if their spouse is there, the spouse will be there in the corner saying, oh, yes. And then I'll have to say, you know, your spouse just disagreed with you. And then they will go into stories about ways in which they have flown off the handle and got irritable that they didn't used to do that. Sleep disturbances. What's the most common sleep disturbance with depression? Anyone? Insomnia is pretty common. This is when your bed hits pillow, but your thoughts keep going, and you're not able to go to sleep. But it's not the most common. Sleeping more is pretty common. Hypersomnia. We have individuals that we had one individual come to our program who was sleeping 20 hours a day. And and that can also be, he mentioned over here, that would be great. But if you have a desire to sleep that much, that's also a sign of a sleep disturbance. Okay. By the way, what is sleeping too much? Anyone want to know what that is for an adult? Yeah, it's over 9 hours is sleeping too much in your adult. Yeah, and it's actually not good for you. Studies show it actually has some brain chemistry effects. So, but hypersomnia is pretty common, or wanting to sleep all the time. And by the way, out of those 4 hours that woman was awake, we found out from her family that 3 out of those 4 hours she was still in bed directing her family from her bed. So she was barely awake long enough to be able to actually survive and, you know, stay clean enough and you know, have enough nutrition to be able to survive. Weight or appetite changes. Oh, by the way, I didn't go into the most common. Neither one of those are the most common. The most common is where you're able to go to sleep, but you wake up too early and can't get back to sleep. It's called early morning awakening. So, you might need to be up at 6, but you're getting up at 4 and you can't go back to sleep. And the more severe the depression, the earlier it is that you wake up. Weight or appetite changes. Either one, weight gain or weight loss. Marked increase in appetite or a decrease in appetite. Both of those qualify. Which do you think is more common, weight gain or weight loss? Weight gain is more common. And why is it more common? That's right. Comfort foods. We self-medicate with food. And what foods do we tend to self-medicate with? He said Lucky Charms, chocolate, donuts. It is the sugary foods. And these sugary foods not only taste good, but they actually transiently help our depression because they bump serotonin levels up transiently, but then the serotonin level falls in a nadir even greater than it was before we ate the sugary substance. And so this is why we're never going to solve the obesity epidemic in our country just by calories in versus calories out. Yes, it is related to that, but I don't know if you saw the other day Weight Watchers that made their whole living based on counting calories and calories in versus calories out is now going bankrupt. And here we have this obesity epidemic and a system that works, calories in versus calories out, but it's so much more related to the mental aspects. And this is the reason why, amazingly in our program, we'll have the underweight and the overweight. And they'll be in the same program, and the overweight all lose weight. And they lose it very healthfully. And the underweight who think they can't gain weight, they all gain weight in the program. Because we're taking care of the brain issues that are bringing these symptoms about. Lack of concentration. How do you know whether you have this? This is where you're reading something that's interesting to you, and you get to the bottom of the page and you realize you missed what was at the top of the page. And you have to go back again and read. And it can get even the second time, you might miss it again. And that's a sign that you don't have that focus and concentration. That's also a common symptom. And then we get into, we would star these next two, because if you've gotten into that, that is a sign of not just burnout, not just depression, but a severe form of it. And that's when feelings of worthlessness start to crop up. And of course, that's an irrational thought. We've been talking about rational thoughts and irrational thoughts some in the evening meetings here. And if you have any ability to be useful to yourself or others, you're not worthless. And of course, if from a Christian perspective, we realize Christ would have died for just one soul. And how much is he worth? Infinite value. And he's giving us evidence of how much he thinks we are worth, because he would have been willing to be wiped out for just one of us. And so feelings of worthlessness is a sign of the irrational thoughts that are there. And then morbid thoughts. What would be an example of a morbid thought? Suicidal thoughts. Even homicidal thoughts. There are people that think that their depression would get better if just someone else would go ahead and die. And that's not really no, it's not the answer. But morbid thoughts is beyond that. It's preoccupation with death or symbols of death. And you'll see this in the world where you can go into any tattoo parlor and tattoo symbols of death on yourself. Anyone who resonates with that, it's a clear sign of morbid thoughts. My wife showed me a fashion magazine the other day, a high-end fashion magazine where all the ladies' bikinis had crossbones and skeletons on them. And they were, the fashion industry is taking advantage of the morbid thoughts of humanity. And when you resonate with that, then you want that and you want to identify with that. But just the thought that you think you would be better off dead, or your family would be better off with you dead. Those are morbid thoughts, and that's a sign of severity. And then the ninth is fatigue. This is where the apathy was about motivation and interest, but fatigue is about energy. And so you either run out of energy too earlier in the day, or you just don't have the energy necessary. Now, you don't need to have all of these symptoms. How many do you have to have? 5 of 9. And if you have 2 of 9, that's still abnormal. That's what we call minor depression, or that's the brownout part of things. So it's only considered normal to have 0 or 1 of these as long as the 1 is not feelings of worthlessness or morbid thoughts, which it normally isn't. Normally, if you have got 1 of those, you've got at least several of the others as well. So it's important to identify it because we shouldn't just put up with this as a quote, normal part of our existence. A survey was done 5 years ago in the North American division with pastors and spouses and children. 49% of pastors struggled with depression and or anxiety. So as we're sitting here today, a lot of you think you're covering it up. You know, nobody knows, your boss doesn't know, your president doesn't know, your ministerial secretary doesn't know, although I'm sure they know about some of you who have been more transparent. But when you're doing a survey, half actually are experiencing this. Do you think it's more or less among the spouses? All right, some of you did have focus. 56% of pastors' children struggle with depression or anxiety, so it's even higher among the children. 61% of spouses struggle with depression or anxiety. So this is quite concerning. The author, the ones who accumulated the data, they did some interpretation at the end, and this was one of their statements. These findings should be of what? Significant concern to the church. Amen. Would you agree with that? Amen. But in this same survey, this was McBride and Sedlacek who did the study. Are you concerned about this? This was in the same, so they were saying, I'm depressed, my children are depressed, my spouse has issues with anxiety. And so after answering these questions among those who had this in their family, they asked the pastors if they were concerned about this. 9% of spouses reported a concern about the mental illness. You see a disconnect? 60-some have it, but only 9% are concerned about it. 7% of children are concerned about it, and only 4% of the pastors were actually concerned about it. And to me, that's even more concerning, because that means if they're not concerned, they're not going to change anything, and they're not planning on doing anything differently, and they're not planning on seeking help, and these things start to spiral. You know, burnout doesn't just stay that way, it continues to spiral. In this same survey, eating unhealthy food with overeating was reported by 40% or higher in pastors, spouses, and children. 18% of children are substance abusers. About 1/3 of pastors and over 45% of children had at least a mild challenge with pornography. Over 1/3 for pastors and spouses struggled with media addiction. I don't know, did any of you hear my presentation Monday morning on? Okay, so for those of you that did not hear the media presentation, I think, is that going to be given out today? Oh wow, he's already got it duplicated, so you guys are going to see that. So this is a big issue, and you'll see why when we get to the brain chemistry part of things, which is what the talk is about, and help you to understand that. 71% of children from pastors struggle with media addiction. So it's way higher among the children as well. term responder apathy syndrome refers to a controversial psychological diagnosis connected to occupational burnout. Originally developed to explain the apathy seen in paramedics and firefighters towards those calling for their help, the definition has generally been expanded to include nurses, therapists, respiratory therapists, other healthcare workers involved in direct patient care. The effects: physical symptoms, poorer health, relationship issues with family and coworkers, and also affects our decisions to leave the clergy or leave the education. And of course, effects also can be suicide, which rates are high in these professions. Notice this statement from an expert who studied this out. Burnout makes it nearly impossible for individuals to provide compassionate care for their clients. So if you're experiencing burnout, it is having an effect. And it's having an effect on you to really be doing the compassionate thing, not necessarily the easy thing. Sometimes we get by and just trying to do the easy thing for our parishioner in need, but it's not necessarily the most compassionate thing. So when we are confronted with this, it's important to have a comprehensive approach. These things do not happen without a cause. And so we have to look for the cause. One of the simple ways of looking for it, we have an online test called the Depression and Anxiety Assessment Test. And it not only can identify what's going on, but it can provide a pathway of the causes that are operative in you and help you to change some things. It turns out we can change a lot of things, from the way we're eating to the way we're sleeping to our circadian rhythms to even many other aspects in regards to how we're thinking. I can tell you, when you learn how to think rationally, it is going to help your parishioners as well, because when you start learning those things, you're going to be preaching about them. You're going to be teaching them about it, and it's a very very needed topic for everybody. One of the books that you might want to get, it's actually written by a Lutheran minister, but we utilize it in our program, Telling Yourself the Truth. And another book, What Your Counselor Never Told You. The subtitle of that, written by this cognitive behavioral therapist who's actually a therapist, although he was trained as a Lutheran minister first. The subtitle of that is The 7 Sins That Lead to Mental Illness. There's a book called The SOS for Emotions that helps us to be able to frame things right, and so we don't get to that point of frustration. And there's a book that we've written as well, going through the 10 different ways of distorted thinking, called The Lost Art of Thinking. And the ABC told me they've sold out of that book there, but I think you can still get it from him. What's that? Oh, it's coming in today. All right. We have ABC representatives here today, so it's coming in today. These books you'll find interesting, enjoyable, and you'll see also that connection to the spiritual side of things. Isaiah 42, verse 16 is kind of our text in dealing with these issues. And then I'd like to just open it up for questions, because as you might imagine, if I just talk about biochemistry, which I could do, when people come to our program, we leave no stone unturned. We find out what's happening in their brain. Are they having an imbalance of certain neurotransmitters? And what is the cause of that imbalance? And often we can turn off even the bad genes just by utilizing some simple supplements to turn that brain chemistry around. And so this is why it requires a comprehensive approach. But Isaiah 42:16 says, I will bring the blind by a way that they knew not. I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them and not forsake them. And so God actually has a tremendous amount of compassion and sympathy even for pastors that have burnout or have depression. And we know that because the one individual that was translated without seeing death and is our representative in regards to that was a clergy person who suffered severe depression and wanted to die. Who was that? Elijah. And he had to put him on a depression recovery program. Angels came and fed him food. I think there was some flaxseed in that meal. Some omega-3 and tryptophan. And then he had to be on an exercise program. He had to get out in the dark and the light. Light therapy was part of it. And then finally, cognitive behavioral therapy. What's going on, Elijah? And Elijah starts speaking. And he let him speak for a while, and then when he started repeating himself in ways that were irrational, the Lord had to stop him and say, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about that. As I mentioned last night, it's not what we don't know that hurts us so much, it's what we know for sure that just ain't so. And Elijah knew some things for sure that just weren't so. And then he put him on a program that he did not really understand. Elijah, when God told him to do 3 things, I won't go into it, you can read about it. It was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do this. I have no clue why you're telling me to do that. But then he thought, it's coming from God. I think he probably knows what he's doing and he wants me to do it, so I'll just go ahead and do it. And did he recover? He recovered completely. He established the school of the prophets, became very effective in his ministry, and then was translated without seeing death. So God wants us to take care of these underlying issues and not delay. So I'll just open it up. Questions, comments? Yes. Well, in regards to general health, actually, we do need some fat in our diet, but it's best, we need omega-3. We need omega-6. That's the Lucky Charms guy over there. And so, yes, but most of those foods we can get in their natural state. Almonds. By the way, if we're taking a look at foods, the American Medical Association called almonds the perfect nut. They have omega-3. They're loaded with a lot of nutrients. They're a good source of tryptophan. It's a good nut overall, and I think that's why in the heavenly sanctuary, we could talk about foods in the heavenly sanctuary. Outside the sanctuary, there was, of course, everything, including the unclean. But then when you got inside the sanctuary, it was only clean meats or clean animals that were allowed in regards to those walls. And, of course, there was the sacrifice there as well. But as far as inside the sanctuary itself, you only saw, plant-based foods. You had the grapes, you had the olive oil that was there, you had the bread, and hopefully you heard what I said yesterday if you were there about bread. The country has tried to turn us into thinking bread is an unhealthy food. It isn't. Whole wheat bread is actually very healthy for the vast majority of us, over 96% who don't have a sensitivity. And bread was there. And then the inside, in the most holy place, was the best. And what food was in there? There was manna and there was almonds, yeah. And that manna is the complex carbohydrates, it's clear, in regards to the type of food that it was. And so, yes, oil can be good, especially olive oil. We would do the extra virgin cold-pressed olive oil is the best. If you heat it up, there can be some issues with that. And so that's how I would answer that question without going into a lot of details. I know you need some announcements here too, so you're free to cut me off at any point. So, okay, okay, we'll take another question. Yeah. Yeah, how can we best support pastors and our loved ones who are dealing with depression? You know, there's several options, and being supportive is important, but also helping them to be accountable to get the help that they need. One of the simple ways is our community-based program, our depression and anxiety recovery program. There's a home-based version. So one of the ways of being supportive is saying, we're going to look at this video once a week, and we're going to go through the workbook together. And let's do this. It only takes 8 weeks to go through. It's pretty simple, and that can be very significant, and it's pretty low cost. Yes. Okay. So here's someone here who just did that, or talks about how she did that. I don't know when you did it, but it significantly worked. And we've had many do that. And that can be, private, in the privacy of your home. You can take these tests privately as well and get that information back, and that can be a good start. If that isn't enough to produce the benefit, that's why we have our residential program. The General Conference just notified us last month that anyone who's a GC employee who needs our program, they will pay 80% in depression and anxiety recovery. And the North American division might follow suit, but I know it would help. Your conference president has been one of the ones who has, on a case-by-case basis, actually paid for pastors to go through the program. And they can tell you about the effects of it. They're all very positively transformed by it. But it would be a lot easier if Adventist Risk Management paid the 80%. And then you don't have to have that aspect of things. So those are things that may be coming, and that would be a great way to support too. We've had pastors and their spouses come through, with the spouse either being a support there for them so they know everything that's being done, or they've been part of the therapeutic program as well. It's very transformative for that couple and their entire church community to do that. Thank you.